Our first stop, the St. Salvatore Day Festival, where a bunch of hooded schizos gather around some kind of monastery. Then our leading lady comes in. Meet Becca Crane. She rushes to a crowd full of red-hooded idiots to find someone named Edward. Speaking of which, here he is now, Edward Sullens. Some egg-headed monks are appalled by this display, and then Becca crosses a fountain. The hooded morons think this is a gesture for partying, so the women remove their hoods for some male gaze eye candy. Becca's stopped by the crowd, so she tries to yodel to Edward, but someone turns on the jelly in the fountain. The jello makes Becca primal like a monkey defending a banana, so she starts pummeling the women in the fountain with her. Some more emo punks are seen, despite the current year. Then Becca finally crawls out to Edward. Sadly, she's hindered more cause there's a rabid fangirl. In fact, there's two factions of them and they begin to beat each other stiff on who's a superior boy toy, Edward or Jacob. The emo punks still gaze at Edward's display, then he goes full commando. Nice to see he's got a disco ball equipped in the right place.
He's exposing himself!
This enrages some of the emo punks, so they send out a signal for termination. Becca runs and hops towards Edward, but she's about to collide with one of those emo punks. See, it all started with Becca moving from her floozy Tiger Woods-loving mom to be with her cop father in Sporks, Washington. Upon arrival, Becca already witnessed a vampire feeding. Totally normal. So Becca tells her sheriff of a dad, Frank. He says how Becca's growing up so fast, even going so far to comment on Becca being, well endowed. Totally an appropriate thing to tell your own daughter. And then Becca plays some teen angst music as they drive downtown. Then Becca remarks seeing a lot of vampire mythos all over town, but she still couldn't figure it out. Becca and Frank arrive at home, and Becca takes out her comically large cactus and begins to move her stuff inside. Frank shows her to her old room, still has her hamster who probably missed a few feedings, and some questionable dolls.
Oh, that's a special edition Feel Real dolly.
Frank's out of touch and gives Becca her pacifier, but she tells him she's a teenager knocking some sense back into him. Outside, Frank carries Becca in a baby vest, and then she falls off. We get to meet these two fine gentlemen. Bobby White, who's completely flaccid from the waist below, and Jacob White, his son. Bobby and Frank get acquainted, and by that I mean they beat each other in the background like mongrels, while Jacob and Becca get to know each other. Jacob says they were childhood friends, but Becca barely remembers. I don't see them going to school together because Jacob probably drinks and gambles all day. After their brutal yet friendly smackdown, Filthy Frank here says he's got a beaten-up truck for Becca as a welcome home present. Becca calls him out for trying to buy her affection with a crummy truck, but Frank thinks she likes it.
Told you she'd like it.
Jacob claims he fixed the engine up himself, so Becca gets in and slams the door in his face. Suddenly, Jacob has some fleas on his head, so he gets to scratching with his foot. Then he leaks on a fire hydrant. You can see what they're going for. Then he gets distracted by a cat running away, so off he goes. Becca drives her new truck to Sporks High School, where she actually finds a perfect parking spot for herself. Not 5 minutes of being the new kid. Becca already gets roasted left and right by the women at school. Some dudes even throw eggs at her. Then they kick the stuffing out of her. As soon as she gets to the halls, she gets a friendly greeting, followed by a punch. This is Derek, and he claims to be the eyes and ears of the school because he can get anyone anything. Cheat sheets, questionable substances, illegal human body parts, you name it. Becca declines his offer and he calls her one of those loner types. Becca corrects him that she's more of a boring type of girl. They go to the cafeteria where this tool named Rick already hits on her. Then comes in Jennifer, the self-absorbed future prom queen. She warns Becca not to bark up her tree. Then they all sit together. Outside, the Sullens, the family of Whites, come in.
Who are they?
Jennifer says their family built on adoption, but they seem to be really close. Jennifer says that their skin is cold, so they're cannibals, and they sleep in coffins. Becca wants to know who they are, but smooth brains from Jersey Shore get in the way. She's actually pointing to Edward Sullens, the exhibitionist from earlier. Jennifer comments that he's too good for anybody, and shows Becca his Facebook profile. Yeesh. With a picture like that, you think he might have been zucked by now. Jennifer doesn't care about everyone because she has a side hustle. Some drifter in Iraq named John. Becca ignores this and makes goo-goo eyes with Edward from across the tables.
Are you, even listening?
Jennifer notices their cheesy and slow-motion stares, and then lunch period is over. It's time for chemistry. Becca encounters Edward once more. She stands over the electric fan, and by the looks of Edward's reaction, she smells like a Smash player. Her teacher tells her to sit next to Edward, and he's in a hazmat suit. She asks him if she smells, and he confirms, but that's just because of her lunch. They introduce themselves to each other, and they talk about the weather. The teacher then asks the students to take out their Vampire Diaries books. and then Becca wonders why that book in particular. Edward says vampires are all the rage now. Then Becca's bag tumbles over to make an apple roll over. Edward catches it, but soon a bowling ball and a baby comes out. Edward catches all of it so that he can juggle it back to Becca's bag. Somewhere else in Sporks, a fisherman feels like he's getting stalked by something. That something turns out to be someone. A woman. She's not alone. We got Ponytail Guy and Dreadlocks Guy with her. All three seem to have a serious case of the munchies, so the fisherman offers Cheetos. Antoine, the guy in dreads, kindly accepts. Too bad his white friend reminds him of something, so it's back to business. He asks the fisherman who they are, and he says they're the Black Eyed Peas. Looks like it's not the first time they were called that, so Ponytail Dude goes in for the pounce. But Fisherman hits back. Apparently he knows some mixed martial arts, so he beats down the pretty boy and gives him a nipple twist. Ah.
How you like that, pretty boy?
He's begging to get the fisherman off him, so they restrain him, then they feast on him. Back to school. Becca arrives at her truck, but before leaving, has another massive stare down with Edward from across the parking lot. Suddenly, some doofus with a car comes in and seems like he's out of control and headed straight for Becca. Edward comes in and uses Derek as a meat shield to save her, and Derek has a few broken bones. The stare down happens again while Derek is in total agony, and then Edward leaves. Becca comes home with some ridiculous memories of Edward's many superhuman characteristics. Jacob suddenly swoops in to make sure she's okay from the accident, and it seems like Jacob might be into her thanks to his romantic gesture. She thanks him, but thinks of him more as a brother. Jacob then warns her to stay away from Edward, and then he leaves, leaving Becca to see his tail jut out of his pants. Frank comes in to say that there was another incident. A fisherman's body was drained of its fluids. Frank says it can only mean that the Kardashians are in town, so he wants her to protect herself with this can of mace. Frank wants her to be trained to use it, so he demonstrates it by letting Becca spray him. He's in deep pain, but he says it's not enough, so Becca brings the almighty nut shot. Despite Frank's future children being eradicated, he says it's not enough, so Becca rips off his mustache. Frank screams and her training is complete.
You're good to go.
Night falls, and it seems that Edward's in Becca's room. She thinks she's dreaming. Edward reassures her and she goes back to bed. She goes through a chaotic sleeping pattern though, resorting to sleepwalking and almost hitting Edward a few times. She heads back to bed and the classic fart joke comes out, driving Edward out the room. She thinks she's not really dreaming of Edward, and then she finds his business card. The following day, Becca arrives at school, only for the announcement of the fluid drive sponsored by the Sullens family. Becca then goes to the cafeteria where she encounters her friends giving out flyers for their prom. The theme is vampires. They just thought of it randomly and they're looking forward to it because of the binge drinking and partying. Becca says she's really not into prom and drives her friends away.
Really, Becca, what is with you?
So she approaches Edward and tells him they need to talk. This talk is more of a hooky as they leave school and go deep into a nearby forest. Becca tells him aloud the weird facts about him, so Edward asks her to say what he is. He's a Jonas brother. No wait, Edward clarifies that he's a vampire.
No, I'm a vampire.
He becomes overdramatic and reveals why the Sullens don't go out during the sunny days. It's because of their bling. He warns Becca that he's a ruthless predator, so he shoots Alice Kingsley. Becca then texts Jennifer that Edward is so yummy, and then Edward proclaims his animalistic hunger towards Becca, but she's cool with it.
I want to eat you.
He then says he and the Sullens only hunt animals and housewives, but he doesn't know if he could control himself around Becca. She then professes her love for him, so he asks if she's willing to go to the prom with him, and she says yes. Then he gets attacked by a zombie squirrel. Let's go ahead and skip to the night at Becca's room, and she's lost in her lustful thoughts. Edward comes by. He says he wants to try something, and it's not role-playing. It is, however, very slow, built-up kisses. Edward freaks out because he's never gotten to first base before, but Becca suggests they go all the way. Trust me, the scene is just begging to be demonetized until Edward hits Becca's head with a lamp. Becca likes it rough, but Edward wants her to keep her distance for her own safety, so he throws her through the ceiling. Edward says he wants to abstain so that Becca won't get hurt, which she comes to realize that's fine, because it's the ultimate pubescent girl's fantasy. At least that's what she wrote on Stephanie Meyer's Twitter. Edward promises as long as she's with him, she'll never get hurt, and right after that, bricks fall all over her. Somewhere in the forest, the three idiots are out running around from the cops and Bobby and Jacob White. They reach a spot in their chase where they discover human foot tracks, so whatever stalked that fisherman was no animal. It was a Canadian. At least that's what Frank's thinking, until Bobby shows the big picture. The literal big picture.
Frank, I think you're missing the big picture.
Going back to the romantic life of Becca. It's her 18th birthday, so Edward drives her to the Sullens residence for a party they personally threw. Becca's a bit nervous because she's different, but Edward brings her inside anyways. In the house, it seems that the place is gussied up just for Becca. There she meets Eden, Edward's mom, Alex, and Rosaline. Then she meets the bubbly Iris. Edward says some of them have unique powers, like Iris can see into the future.
I just know we're gonna be great friends.
She offers some tampons to Becca because she sees her period coming early this month. Then in comes Dr. Carlton, saying that they're just like any other American family, soulless. Last but not least is Jeremiah. He's new to the family, and he's still pretty ravenous. Becca feels like she should go because she doesn't want to cause any problems, but Iris asks her to open her presents. She gets a paper cut, and then Jeremiah loses it, so Edward throws him off. The Sullens are getting riled up, so Alex and Dr. Carlton attack Becca. Edward makes her dodge him. Then they're thrown and trapped inside a tanning machine, where Edward sets it to high. The girls are still riled up for their hunger for Becca, so the perfect distraction comes. The Chinese delivery guy. That's gonna distract him for about an hour, and Edward takes Becca out of there with breakneck speed. Really fast on his Segway, mind you. They go to this one spot in the forest, and Edward proclaims his regret that he couldn't keep Becca safe. Becca, however, wants to be bitten and turned into a vampire, but Edward couldn't bear the fact that she'd be eternally youthful and lively. Kind of like Clooney. The only thing that does age are their glutes. So Edward says he'll never see her again to keep her safe, and she promises to him that she'll be safe and won't date Chris Brown. He leaves on his Segway, but Becca still calls out to him. Soon she trips and goes hysterical on the ground. Suddenly, the three amigos arrive and they look hungry. He maces one of them, but it lands on Buffy instead. They all take a bite on Becca, but Edward zooms in and stops him. He and Jack are left to fight together, and then Jack goes for the pounce. Too bad Edward brought his A-game with him and he scored a home run. In disarray, the remaining hostile vampires retreat, and then Edward tends to Becca, who's spazzing out. There's one thing left to do. Edward has to bite into Becca and suck that venom out.
Just do it already.
Well, the venom's out, but he sucks Becca almost completely dry with a straw. Becca does survive though, and then Edward leaves. She goes home and gets into a depressive state because Edward left her. She even reads all these crummy self-help books. Months are passing, and Becca can't get Edward out of her mind. She begins to see him everywhere, but I think everyone can see Edward everywhere. For real, where are they getting these Edward costumes? Becca begins to feel the edge of her nihilism, as she would have these really loud nightmares, but that's because she sleeps with a megaphone. Frank comes in to stop her and check her angst levels. Then he comes to try and comfort Becca, but ends up giving Beverly Hills white girl advice. He also says Jen keeps calling, and then he tells her goodnight with his questionable rubber doll. Becca eventually takes the advice and goes to see a movie with Jennifer. Safe to say, Jen hated that movie and thinks anyone who's got the hots over a vampire is a total tool. Jen tells her that she's going to be the most stunning girl in prom. And out of jealousy, Becca has a bit of a stabby moment with her. Don't worry, just imagination. The two are about to split, and then Becca remembers she parked her truck next to some mean biker folks.
Right next to those mean and scary biker dudes.
Well, they're just plain mean, throwing a can at her. Jacob's teaching Becca to ride a motorcycle with his wolf fur claws and nose to boot. Becca notices and he confesses he just got his bar mitzvah. Well, Becca's happy for him, and then he asks her if she wants to date him, but she keeps revving that bike. Jacob asks her to stop, asks again, but this time a truck gets him, so he screams his confession.
Oh, come on!
Well, Becca's spooked, so she cuts the bike's brakes and goes full speed. She's going full schizo and keeps seeing Edward, so she tries to bait him to come back to her by doing dangerous and idiotic things, but it's all in her head. Becca's thrown off. Jacob comes to help her, but he's quite the hairball. Antoine comes instead, and Becca escapes into the woods. Antoine catches up and brings the unfortunate news that Rachel was recast. Then he tries to take a bite out of Becca, and Jacob comes to the rescue in the form of a chihuahua. Yeah, Antoine isn't intimidated.
That's why I always travel in a pack.
So the pack comes by and they dance It's Raining Men. I don't know, man. Whatever the writers were smoking, I want 5 orders of it. Instead, they're getting multiple orders from Antoine as they rip him apart. Jacob comes back in a better human form, and Becca's filled once more with hormones. She's asking Jacob to sign her Dream Body magazine, and then Jacob princess carries her home. Somewhere daft, Edward seems to be having his own depressing episode, watching a romantic movie about a fly and a woman.
Why can't they just be together?
Iris finds him and says he's absolutely looking like trash. She also gives her apologies for trying to make a meal out of Becca, but she also says something terrible has happened to her. Edward's cool with it, as he's done with normal chicks, and moved on to literally Lady Gaga. Iris scoffs it off and says she had a vision where Becca might have killed herself in a motorcycle accident. Edward recoils in disbelief. But over at the Crane household, Becca's fine. She gets some medicine and tea from a rebound guy who just took his shirt off.
Why did you just take off your shirt?
He says it's part of his contract though. Jacob tries to convince Becca to take their relationship out of the friend zone, but we all know that zone doesn't exist. Becca says she feels safe and secure with him. To her, being with Edward just kind of riles up her girl beans. The phone rings. Jacob answers it. It's Edward. He's looking for Frank, but Jacob says he's at the fisherman's funeral. Jacob mistakes this for Becca's funeral. Edward's in disarray and decides to end his life, but Iris just had a vision about Becca and she's fine. Too bad Edward goes missing.
Edward!
The next day, Becca's sitting all lonely on the porch, while her friends from school tease her about being a prune, even throwing a wine bottle at her head. Suddenly, Iris comes in with a Porsche, asking her to get in. She gets in and breaks the news that Edward thinks Becca isn't living anymore. Suddenly, Jacob jumps in their car and he wants Becca to be with him, so Jacob makes her confess, until a cat distracts him. Iris says Edward's going to the Zoltery to end his own life. The Zoltery are basically powerful vampires. All of this is going to happen at Becca's prom because they're hardcore party monsters. Iris and Becca arrive at that party, so this is where we left off.
Oh, I got skills, bitch.
Becca chasing Edward to tell him she's alive. The movie quite literally fast forwards to a part we haven't seen, which is the Zoltery grunt pouncing at her. The grunt misses and Becca lands at her two snooty friends. The sun gets overcast and Edward shows his new moon to everyone. Becca finally catches up to him and he's in disbelief that she's alive. He promises never to leave her, but the Zoltery start to beat him up. Frank comes in and Becca breaks the news to her father, but he thinks it's just the theme of the prom, so he leaves.
Becca, by the way, thanks for everything.
Edward and Darrow, one of the Zoltery, are still fighting all around prom. The fight grinds to a halt as the Zoltery have Becca hostage, so Darrow cuts him a deal. Becca has become a vampire. Darrow painfully threatens him, so Edward agrees to the deal. Edward's about to bite, but they're interrupted by the principal nominating the Zoltery as the new prom king and queen. Darrow celebrates his win, but he still asks Edward to bite Becca. Well, he agrees, but only on one condition, that they get married. Becca says yes, and Edward makes the chomp. She turns out to be perfectly fine. But Edward gets mauled by the Team Jacob girls. Retract those fangs, cause that was it for Vampires Suck. Yeah, I don't know, what'd you guys think about this hilariously angst of a movie? Let us know in those comments below using the hashtag #CinemaRecap. This was Vampires Suck by Regency Enterprises, starring Jen Prosk, Matt Lanter, and Ken Jeong. Until the next 50 Shades fanfiction, farewell.